with regards to my daughter, it's like don't ask, don't tell sometimes. Yeah, thanks for that introduction, Shelley. You know, before, and I'm here in my official capacity, so I'm not going to go into my personal campaign and re-election. I don't think that would be appropriate. But I will talk about, you know, kind of at the national level, what is happening in America, and just kind of politically, you know, my perspective on where we are, you know, at the national level, and then start to bring it more locally here about, you know, where we go from here as a region and as a community. But first, let me, you know, I was listening to the invocation at the start, and you know, there was this theme of open heart, open mind. And when you think about, you know, invocations, when you think about prayers, you know, it really is about counting our blessings. And far too often, I don't think we take enough time out as Americans to step back and realize how blessed we are to be Americans, to live in this country that, you know, is rooted on a foundation of freedom, of liberty, of individual opportunities, and with those opportunities, individual responsibilities as well. And you know, far too often we get mired down in this pitched battle, you know, labeling folks Democrat or labeling folks Republican or liberal or conservative. Yet we don't step back and think about what binds us together as Americans. And you know, I think that is to our peril, that we don't appreciate. You know, there's more that we have in common than that separates us. And you know, before I go into my comments, you know, I'll just share you know, something that I thought you know, is a vivid way to remind us of who we are. We just you know, remembered the 15th anniversary of September 11th, that tragic day that our nation was attacked. And you know, we did a lot of public events and going out, but the one that really touched me was, you know, Speaker Paul Ryan leading members of Congress, the House of Representatives on the steps of the Capitol. And as we were standing there, we weren't Republicans or Democrats. We weren't, you know, Californians or Alabamans. We were Americans. And you know, as we stood there singing "God Bless America," remembering that tragic day, you know, we didn't see ourselves as separate. We saw ourselves together. And that's what we have to hold on to. You know, in the aftermath of September 11th, you know, in the tragedy, we came together as a nation. And we shouldn't wait for tragedy to happen. We should, you know, spend more time trying to bring ourselves together as a nation so we actually can pay it forward, so that our children and our grandchildren have the same blessings that we were able to have. So I just, you know, was reflecting on that as I listened to the benediction and think about why do I get on an airplane every week and leave my family and fly across the country and then at the end of the week fly all the way back? And it is because I feel like I've been blessed. I'm a lifelong Californian. I was born and raised here. I'm a product of our public schools. I went to phenomenal public schools. I was a math and science guy, but I also took wood shop, auto shop, metal shop, and I feel like I had this breadth of training. And you know, as I watched my daughter go through school, I actually think I got a better education because it wasn't just about taking tests. It was about learning not just to use my mind, but to use my hands. And I do think we've lost something, that we've not done as much of that vocational training and education. You know, fast forward, you know, was able to go to community college, was able to go to undergraduate and medical school at the University of California, Irvine, and graduate with less than $10,000 of debt. That's remarkable. Shelley mentioned that we have a daughter she just started her sophomore year of school, and I know it's not the same way any longer, right? I mean, she certainly is, you know, paying quite a bit more at this juncture. And you know, when I think about that I know I didn't get here by myself. I got here because this country made an investment in me. I got here because I had this chance to reach my full potential. None of that was a handout. I worked extremely hard to get where I am today, and it was that opportunity. And we have to get back to giving the next generation that same opportunity, making those same investments. And again, none of that is a handout. You have to work hard to get where you are, but we ought to open that door. Now, I've had a blessed life. Janine and I have lived here for 21 years in the region, and we've seen a lot of change. I've had the chance to first serve as a doctor, serving the community, and then serving in public health, and then as the Dean for Admissions at UCDA Medical School, and now as a member of Congress for the 7th Congressional District. And I'm optimistic about our future as a region and as a nation. But it won't happen unless we intentionally start to work together. When I reflect back on what I'm most proud about is a group that we started. My first month in Congress, we started this group, and some of you have heard me talk about it, the Problem Solvers Caucus. Started with 23 Democrats, 17 Republicans. Many of us were freshmen. I think about half of us were freshmen. And about half of us had never held public office before. We ran because we wanted to see something different. We came together and said, we've got to stop fighting, and we've got to start fixing things. So we grew our group from those original 40 members to about 100 members of Congress, including 8 senators. We tried to keep it pretty evenly split, and we did do some good pieces of legislation. One piece, I will give you an example of one piece that we worked on. I was having dinner with a Republican from New York, Chris Gibson, and yet Democrats and Republicans can have dinner together. And Chris was a fellow problem solver. He's a retired Army colonel. I'm obviously a Democratic doctor. We were talking about the backlog in the VA system. And I would tell you, people ask me what was the most surprising thing that I discovered when I first got elected. And one of the most surprising was how long our veterans were waiting to get into the system, to get care that they deserved. And that was shocking, and it was happening all across the country. So Chris and I were talking about that, and we landed on a simple solution. The Department of Defense had one set of medical records. The VA system had an entirely different set of medical records. And when you left active duty, they pretty much say, here's your records. You have to go to the end of the line and start all over again, because those record systems didn't communicate. So we wrote a simple one-page bill, the 21st Century Healthcare for the Heroes Act. Chris happened to be on the Veterans Committee, so he introduced it. We got it attached to the Defense Authorization Act, which passed, became law. So fast forward to this term, and that was the last session of Congress. Fast forward to this term in Congress, Chris and I were talking about it. It's like, just because we passed that law doesn't mean they're actually doing what we said they were supposed to be doing. So we reached out to the DoD and the VA system and asked their IT staff to come in and give us an update on how things were going. And what they said was this is something they wanted to do for a long time, but with the bureaucracy that exists, if they didn't have that piece of legislation, that piece of law, they couldn't go and say, hey, we've got to do this. Congress has demanded that we do it. And it was clunky, but they took Chris's military ID number, and they were able to pull down his active duty records and his VA records. Now, it's not where I would like to see it, but they are making progress, and they're doing it. Now, imagine what we could do if we actually work together. And so to a lot of veterans, that's going to be a big deal, because that's not only going to shorten the wait times, it'll save us money, and it'll make it a lot easier for those veterans when it's fully implemented. But what could we do if we got together and said, look, let's balance the budget. Let's actually take a look at the regulatory environment and look at regulations that may have made sense in 1970, but they sure don't make sense today because the world's changed. How do we actually start to focus on efficiency of government? And So I'm the Democratic co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus. Tom Reed from New York's the Republican co-chair. So as we went into this election cycle, we really focused on a couple of things. We understood that, in presidential elections, everything would become about the presidential race. But we also understood that there was a real opportunity in January of 2017, regardless of who the president of the United States is, to say if we actually worked on some policy ideas, big things that we thought would make a difference. When that next president is elected, if we went to them as 40 members of Congress or 100 members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, and said, look, here's 2 or 3 big ideas that we want to work on. We've worked on some of the policy, and here's some of the stuff that we agree on. Pick out one of these ideas, and let's get something done in that first year. In presidential races, that first year of the new presidency is when they have the most ability to enact change. So, the ideas we've been working on are how do you strengthen Social Security and Medicare for the next 75 years? Vitally important programs that many of our seniors, our retirees depend on. As I mentioned, how do we get to a balanced budget? How do we create 25 million jobs? And the last one, which we really have been focusing quite a bit on, is how do we actually invest in infrastructure, rebuild our roads, highways, bridges? That should be a no-brainer. At this juncture, that would create millions or hundreds of thousands of jobs. Those are jobs that can't be outsourced. Drive around the roads and highways around here, and there's a lot of vital work that needs to be done. And historically, we've always done that in a bipartisan way. So we've been working on that, and we're actually not that far off. So our hope is, as that next president gets elected, we would work with their transition team. We would then, put out these 4 or 5 ideas with some policy proposals behind them and some pieces of legislation, and ask them to work with us. And hopefully that breaks the fever. So that's what's happening at the national level. Let's bring it down here to the region. We were chatting at our table about Sacramento, and Janine and I moved up here 21 years ago. But like a lot of folks who have moved to Sacramento, this is home, and we realize how remarkable this community is, and more people are starting to realize that. So when I talk about why I am very optimistic about what our future looks like, my optimism comes from the people that live here, but the real opportunities that are present. If we look at our assets, we have 2 phenomenal 4-year universities in Sac State and UC Davis that are doing some pretty remarkable work. And then we have one of the best community college systems around in the Los Feliz Community College. So we're graduating a very talented workforce every year. The thing is, when you ask some of these graduates, many of them would choose to stay here if the jobs were here. So then the next question is, how do we get those jobs here? And we very much are working strategically with the chambers of commerce, with Greater Sacramento, et cetera, to lure those companies